Gets. I'm just feeding you the stories. Maybe this is the context.
News in depth. The context with
I'm Yalda Hakim. The lengths that Afghan girls have to go to keep learning were inside Afghanistan's secret schools, defying the Taliban to give people an education. On patrol with the Afghan vice and virtue inspectors, the official investigators ensuring That's all coming up here on Impact. Appropriate behaviour. Well, let's go straight to Kabul now and speak to our correspondent Secunda Kamani, who's there for us. And Secunda, I mean, this was such a fascinating, extraordinary piece of journalism. Just tell us a little bit more of what you saw.
They've been increasingly prominent in recent weeks and months after the Taliban initially appeared to be taking a more flexible, pragmatic attitude than many had expected them to adopt when they seized power last August. When it comes to girls' education, these teenage girls, like most in the country, have not been allowed back to school by the Taliban, so they're attending lessons secretly. Today's class, trigonometry.
Of course, it's worth it. Yeah.
Back in March, it seemed girls' schools were finally reopening, but at the last minute, the Taliban leadership overruled the decision. For students here, the pain is still raw. That female education is a sensitive issue for them, with some influential hardliners apparently opposed to it. But in private, others within the group have expressed their disappointment at the decision not to allow all girls' schools to reopen and should be educated.
There is no justification in Sharia to say female education is not allowed. No justification at all. All the religious books have stated female education is permissible and obligatory. Because, for example, if a woman gets sick in an Islamic environment like Afghanistan or Pakistan and needs treatment, it's much better if she is treated by a female doctor.
Well, as well as concerns about women's and girls' rights in Afghanistan, the country is in the middle of a continuing economic and humanitarian crisis. I'm joined now live by Sam Mort from UNICEF. Thank you for joining us.
Outbreak, we have children not allowed to go to school, we have children being pulled out of school to work because their parents are crippled by poverty. We have children crying with starvation. It is the suffering that children are enduring is still going on. Last year, UNICEF Afghanistan launched the organisation's biggest ever single country appeal for $2 billion, in part because of the increased demand and funded. So we're desperately urging our donors to support us. We thank them for what they've done, but we need them to dig deeper.
When I've spoken to Western officials before, they've raised concerns that the increasingly hard-line attitude of the Taliban to engage in the country. I wonder, in your discussions with the Taliban, have you had any indication that girls' secondary schools will reopen anytime imminently?
We are advocating with the de facto authorities every day in school learning. There's nothing more important for UNICEF. We're deeply concerned about the fact that girls in high school are not learning right now. Yes, there are rumours. Yes, there have been false starts. We will believe it when we see girls back in class. You say we are creating what we call community-based classes. These are small classes that might be in mosques or homes or in tents that enable children, particularly in rural and remote areas, to learn. Some of those classes are for
secret schools for girls. The other main concern that I think many people are grappling with here in Afghanistan when it comes to women's rights is the latest decree from the rather notorious. Meet the inspectors of the Ministry of vice and virtue. With branches across the country, they're remoulding Afghanistan to fit in with the Taliban's hard-line beliefs. And how often do you do this?
We have already given advice to the owner of the shopping center and put up some posters, but we can't interact with individuals. For example, stopping a woman and asking her, "Why are you not wearing the correct hijab?" My manners in religion do not permit me to.
In such a conservative country, it's not clear which women he means. Many already cover their faces. In cities like Kabul, others simply cover their hair. This is how the Taliban. The inspectors are on the move. Next up, a bus stop. Their ministry has a fearsome reputation from their role during the Taliban's previous regime. Are behaving politely, gently with the public. Is that always the case when cameras are not around for teams right across the country? Local residents we spoke to off camera had no complaints about these inspectors.
But wouldn't even look at me. He said, "You're very shameless women. This is not the Afghan Republic. Now it's the Islamic Emirate. You cannot do whatever you want anymore."
Enforcement by these inspectors from the Ministry of Vice and Virtue at the moment doesn't seem to be as strict as many had feared that it would be, but no one's quite sure where it's going to end up. I was speaking just the other day to one businessman who was contemplating.
Shimi is a human rights defender and university lecturer. She joins me now live from Kabul. Thank you very much, Susan John, for joining us here on the programme. We were just watching that report that Secunda did, where he was walking around with the Ministry of Vice and Virtue. They were telling people in
drastics to the education, from severe food shortage to poverty, and so many more challenges. You know, wearing hijab or not wearing it could be affecting all the country's problems. They are much bigger from this thing.
Just tell me how your life has changed in the past 9 months since the Taliban came to power.
Education, my dreams for a brighter future, even the dispersed or families member or friends across the globe. It can have a very big impact on our mental and psychological situation.
You go out, that you face, that other women face, that you speak to?
Yeah, flagrantly. It's very clear that after they turn to the power back, I'm insecure mentally, I'm insecure physically when I go outside. I have to have a mahram with me.
That's a guardian, that's a man in your life who you're related to.
Yeah, exactly. And unfortunately, the male members of the family are not. I'm just staying worrying about the future of my daughters and other girls and women who are living inside the country, and they are struggling from strict rules which are not even to invite them to come to Islam. So how we can have such strict rules or forces in order to wear hijab, or how to appear, or how to behave? Actually, hopeless. If we see there's no education for girls, there's no career development and job opportunities. The even forces or the fires a life for fairness, that they can be targeted anytime, they can be violated anytime, they can lose their freedom of speech, they can lose their freedom.
Such a series of alarming new records.
Nature, all-powerful and uncompromising, a force over which mankind has no control. But when
1933, बरसों से सरसों Our global food system is under profound pressure from climate change, population growth, and fractured supply chains. But might these shocks to our system actually be a catalyst for positive?
This is Impact on BBC World News. I'm Yalda Hakim. The head of the UN has called for a speedy transition to renewable energy after a new report.
He's desperately trying to kind of, marshal the world to begin to do something about it. I mean, I remember speaking to him when he started his term, and he said he wanted climate change to be at the heart of everything he does at the UN. And obviously things like the war in Ukraine, knock him off the... It's getting more acidic as well. And I think it's quite interesting just to focus on that ocean heat and acidification, because, warmer oceans store less oxygen. So you've got, and they also are becoming more acidic as they take carbon dioxide from the air. And you'd say welcome progress from Europe. Europe's looking obviously to decouple from oil and gas from Russia. And as part of that, it's got this Repower EU, an attempt to kind of restructure the energy system of Europe. It's investing some money in liquid gas, ways of...
Heat, of course, remains the story across northern parts of India and up into Pakistan. More high temperatures to come here over the next few days. Further south, though, monsoon rains getting pretty close to southern India. The monsoon already has arrived in the south of Sri Lanka, and that rain actually extending across into parts of Myanmar as well, so there could be flooding downpours here. Also, some really intense thunderstorms for the northeast of India and parts of Bangladesh. So in Dhaka, we could well see showers over the next couple of days. In Lahore, temperatures just...
All-powerful and uncompromising, a force over which mankind has no control. But when one aligns with nature, she is warm, nurturing and loving. P-Mark mustard oil has always followed in nature's footsteps, extracting mustard oil using completely...
Posted your best self, the digital representation of you that you wanted to portray to your friends.
Now follower accounts have like a certain social currency maybe we weren't quite aware of, that we were kind of king-making in that.
We don't fully understand what the consequences of this period will be.
This is just the beginning. And the thing that I think young people see, that maybe people a little bit older than them don't, is how intense the problems are. Because teenagers are killing themselves.
In the first war crimes trial in Ukraine, a Russian soldier has pleaded guilty to shooting dead a 62-year-old Ukrainian in the Sumy region a few days into the war. He faces life in prison. Sweden and Finland have formally submitted their application to join NATO.
From oil to wind, the EU hopes to transform the North Sea into and to import the gas it needs from outside of Russia. It also seeks to transform the continent's North Sea from an oil field into a green powerhouse by building offshore wind farms. From the west coast of Denmark, Adrian Murray reports.
Send them to shore.
Standing beneath these turbines makes you feel incredibly small. They tower more than 100 meters above the sea.
Denmark is a leader in this technology, and around half of it
wind resources. The remarkable thing is that offshore wind today is, together with, by the way, also other renewables, significantly cheaper than conventional power sources.
More wind farms like this one are set to come up in the North Sea.
By hundreds of turbines, about 80 kilometres from land. The power would be routed directly to neighbouring countries, potentially supplying millions of households. Many of the world's turbines are shipped through this port in Esbjerg.
One of the big challenges with such massive amounts of renewable energy is the intermittency. If you are on a sufficient large scale, you will always have wind or solar somewhere.
This port town was an oil and gas.
And does it send a warning shot to other boardrooms?
So on the one hand, it is significant because, as you rightly pointed out, this has never really happened in the last 10 years of having this sort of overarching board. And it and that boards of directors are starting to look at this very carefully. On the other hand, of course, this is not that significant because the vote is actually non-binding. So Jamie Dimon is still going to get that money, but it does really...
The industry group IATA says the recovery in Asia is delayed, with China and Hong Kong particularly affected. IATA's Director General Willie Walsh has been speaking to the BBC's Suranjana Tiwari.
International travel within Asia is one of the biggest markets in the world. The zero COVID approach is not consistent with the recovery of international markets. So, you know, the outlook for places like Hong Kong and China are quite discouraging.
And what are you telling the Chinese government?
I think continue to be very conservative about reopening their borders. We would encourage the Japanese government to be a bit bolder. You know, they've done a fantastic job in building up a tourism industry, which had been hugely successful up to.
But if the entry was easy, the risks are also high.
The volatility of crypto is what makes it attractive. You know, like high risk, high reward kind of thing. Me and my best friend were freaking out the other day because the market was like plunging almost 40 to 50%.
Consumer protection. It's also difficult to get financial advice because traditional experts, many of them see trading in them as gambling. It's a world that can suck you in. And some of those who get hooked end up here. Though in 2017, he lost $500,000 in the following year when prices plunged.
I think I almost went into depression. A lot of youngsters nowadays, they just jump in. My advice to them is don't be like me, you know? Don't be greedy.
Spacious and supremely comfortable BMW 3 Series Grand Limousine. Welcome to the grand side of thrill.
Push your head, yeah. Cool, chill your dill.
The Russian invasion of Ukraine continues, and so do the attacks on the south and east of the country.
This attack happened while the Secretary General of the United Nations was in Kyiv.
But once again, it's civilians who are the casualties.
There's still.
So when events move quickly, you need to make sure you have the facts, and that's where experience counts. Having a global view really makes a difference, and shining a light on stories across the world. Sport Today.
Hello, I'm Sarah Mulcairn. So Celtics in the NBA playoffs and forced to abandon the Giro d'Italia one day after making history as the first Black African winner of a Grand Tour stage. Collective bargaining agreements through to December 2028, with the unions for both national teams ending years of tense negotiations. The two CBAs achieve equal pay through identical economic terms, including an equal BBC Sport website. Now, Wednesday sees the final of the Europa League as Rangers take on Eintracht Frankfurt. For all the build-up, we can cross to Seville and join reporter Jane Dougal.
Thousands of Rangers fans have been battling to get to Marrakesh and then finally got to Seville. They're just doing anything they can to get to Spain by hook or by crook. And as you can imagine, tickets are changing hands for thousands of euros. But then to be here, to put at the bottom of the Scottish football tier, they've worked their way up and now they are in a European final. And as Pat Nevin says, this will be an incredible occasion.
A lot of fans thought that you would never see the club anywhere close to this again, but Pro was maybe more important than Europa League. But this is vitally important, not just for what it says about winning the trophy, but what it does going forward financially as well.
And Frankfurt are a decent side. I mean, domestically they didn't have such a good season. They finished 11th, including Borussia Dortmund, and they are very, very hungry to get some European silverware.
Jane Dougal in Seville. Jimmy Butler's 41 points powered the Miami Heat to a comeback win over the Boston Celtics in the Eastern Conference Finals opener.
I want to run into people and see who falls down first, who's going to quit first. I think that's a style of basketball I like to play. and so do they. And, you know, I was 0 for 2 from 3 tonight.
By the cork from the bottle of Prosecco he was opening to celebrate winning the 10th stage. He went to hospital afterwards where doctors discovered a hemorrhage within his eye and recommended that he withdraw from the race to avoid it getting worse. Have named Australia women's boss Matthew Mott as their new men's white ball coach on a 4-year deal. The 48-year-old has overseen his native Australia's dominance of the women's game as holders of the Ashes in both the T20 and 50-over World Cups. He will work alongside our sports correspondent Joe Wilson has more.
Really interesting appointment because he's made his name in women's cricket, coaching the all-conquering Australian women's team. I think it's a sign of the stature and really the credibility of women's cricket that England would look to recruit.
At last year's tournament at 50, but stepped away from the sport in February following the reaction to comments he made regarding the new Saudi Arabian-backed golf league.
This should be a celebration, right? I mean, he won a major championship at 50 years old.
His right leg and foot. He played in the Masters in Augusta and he is grouped with McIlroy and Jordan Spieth for the first 2 rounds this week.
There's going to be limitations. I mean, there's a lot of hardware in there and there's going to be limitations to what I'm going to be able to do, and how much that is or how much range of motion I'll ever get back. But sure as a hell of a lot better than it was, 12 months ago.
Tiger Woods there. Right, that's it from us here on Sport Today. We will see you again soon. Bye.
Grand Limousine. Welcome to the grand side of thrill.
Nature, all-powerful and uncompromising, a force over which mankind has no control. But when one aligns with nature, she is
Almond butter.
Hello, I'm Ross Atkins with Outside Source. This is the extraordinary story of climate change. Vaccines for Ukraine. Let's look at some of the international...
Multiple bomb attacks in the winter of 2013. Today, the community lives in isolated ghettos guarded by checkpoints.
I think of our mission as
improving urban design, mobility, and ultimately reducing carbon emissions.
We are getting used to ordering an Uber and it's downstairs in 5 minutes, right? That already happened for mobility modes that are not so environmentally friendly. So somehow we related to the fares, maybe you can have a different price if you're pedaling or not.
I would definitely not be pedaling. I would just be sitting there and getting driven to where I need to get to.
We are not designing this is going to be the ideal solution, but it's more in this field of shared autonomous.
Bicycle pedaling its own way around campus.
It happens here at MIT that everyone has different prototypes going around campus. So some people would look at it, others wouldn't even realize that that's an experiment.
The vehicles could connect with public transit and be used
anymore. We think about what might be beyond smart cities. We're looking at ways to increase the social performance, the economic performance, and the environmental performance of cities.
The commute is in their crosshairs by cutting it down.
Exactly what you want to do in the community to reduce CO2 emissions is what you want to do to increase the innovation potential, the interaction of people, encourage people to get more exercise, which improves the public health. You keep wealth in the community.
Developing possible solutions to ensure we actually have one.
We're inside Afghanistan's secret schools, defying the Taliban to give people an education. We'll speak live to an Afghan educator who campaigns for women and girls to have access to schooling in Afghanistan. In the first war crimes trial in Ukraine, Russia's ocean and greenhouse gas concentrations as the climate crisis accelerates. That's all coming up here on Impact. Start of term, but schools remain closed for girls above the age of 12. Back in March, it seemed as if girls' schools were about to reopen, but just an hour or so after pupils began arriving, the Taliban leadership announced a sudden change in policy. They said they needed to finally...
Small but powerful act of defiance. These teenage girls, like most in the country, have not been allowed back to school by the Taliban, so they're attending lessons secretly. Today's class.
They arrest me, they beat me, but it's worth it to do that.
It's worth it.
Of course, it's worth it. Yeah.
Back in March, it seemed girls' schools were finally reopening, but at the last minute, the Taliban leadership.
To all the girls of Afghanistan is be brave. If you are brave, no one can stop you.
Younger girls have been allowed back to school, but it's not clear when or if older girls will be. Sheikh Rahimullah Haqqani is an Afghan cleric well respected by the Taliban, based in Pakistan. On a recent trip to Kabul, he met senior figures in the group. He's careful not to criticize the continued closure of girls' schools. All ages are back in the classroom, but the Taliban have now formed a committee to debate what to do about girls' secondary schools. For now, it seems their most hardline elements are the ones deciding what the country's future will look like.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I mean, yes, there are bans that are happening. At the same time, why are they not questioning the main problems in Afghanistan? You were in Afghanistan yourself. Didn't you see all the hunger, the poverty that was happening? Students, the only reason they show up to those classes because they believe in a better future that they have known back in the day. I mean, not everything was right. Yes, human rights were abused by many types, but there was a right to education. There was a right to socialize, mobilize. Our country is starving right now.
What and how do you think the international community should deal with the Taliban? Because the Taliban continue to meet with different officials, the Europeans, for example. I had an MEP earlier talk to
questions, asking them when the schools will open, asking them to respect human rights, to respect women's rights. I think that's what the international community should have been doing. And at the same time, if they are not delivering on their word, why don't they impose
I just want you to listen and watch this clip, which has come from the Ministry of Vice and Virtue. They were out and about in a shopping mall in Kabul, and they were speaking to men, telling them how they should behave and what they should be doing. And morally corrupt, and what is the point of the hijab if you don't cover your entire face? I just want your reaction to that.
I just have a simple question from them. So they are following Islam. They're talking about moral corruption. Where is their morals when children are starving?
Inspired by the courage and bravery of young Afghan girls and women who are forced to go out onto the streets, who face intimidation, who are sometimes detained and taken away and made to disappear.
For their rights. They're the bravest of many people that I have seen and many nations. But then there are regional countries who are also Muslims and who have aided in the Taliban but wouldn't lift a finger for the Afghan women. I mean, is that what Muslim sisterhood is all about?
Yeah, and Afghan women have been here before in the 90s when they were banned from getting an education, from being, accessing work and various other things. I mean, the fact is that they, like the programs you have, find other means and ways to get an education, to ensure that they don't miss out. But what now? How do you see things playing out today and going forward?
are involved with the Taliban right now. So you have to understand that these things, these movements are happening within the communities, and they do believe in a better future. And when there is a better future in the making, of course, the Taliban have to either accept the Afghan women, their rights.
200 bodies of civilians have been recovered by police in the Kyiv region since the Russians pulled out early last month. Officers say their priority is to make people feel safe again, as well as gather evidence of potential war crimes. One of them, a man called Ivan Semerov.
With extraordinary composure and detail, Ivan shows me what he's lost.
We found my mother dead on a fridge here, and then we kept searching.
This is the police station where Ivan was working when his home was hit. Now, Ivan isn't interested in justice. In his words, he wants the Russians who carried out that attack.
Also the grief of our people. The most important thing is that police will be close to people and they will know where to come for help.
Ivan is given an award for courage. He helped people escape.
James Waterhouse reporting there. Now stay with us here on Impact. Still to come, 100,000 Glasgow Rangers football fans travel to Seville half a century on from their only European triumph. They take on Eintracht Frankfurt in the Europa League final.
How worried is the WHO? 80%. You know how many seats your party got? 0, Mrs.
We failed to win seats, but we got more votes than previous election.
It's a risk you're taking.
I take risks every day.
The reason you haven't divorced is that you simply can't afford it.
You're right about that.
Hard.
Hakim, the head of the UN, has called for a speedy transition to renewable energy after a new report showing the climate crisis accelerated last year, breaking records for sea levels, ocean heat and greenhouse gas concentrations. Antonio Guterres warned that with the UN Secretary General making this very stark warning, using words like catastrophe, because frankly, these reports come out, but is the world acting enough?
The world has started acting, but the so that we published is demonstrating that we haven't seen any positive changes in the real atmosphere, quite the opposite.
So these reports come out, and today we've got, for example, we've got the UN State of the Global
records in every corner of our planet, and we are lucky to have also better technological means to be successful in climate mitigation. For example, the prices of solar and wind energy, they have been dropping by getting rid of fossil energy, coal, oil and natural gas.
So you're saying that, you're saying that these can be resolved if we correct it, but they're not being.
Like China, India and Brazil to mitigate climate change, because the impacts of climate change, sea level rise, melting of glaciers, less water to the main rivers, and also these air quality problems. Climate change is the biggest threat for the welfare of mankind and biosphere this century. This war is going to be over one day, and thereafter we will still have a climate problem with us, and that's the thing that we should.
Seville.
They have been getting here any way they can, on buses, planes and trains.
Glasgow to London to Madrid, and then got a
just got here. I don't know what time it is. 6:45. Tuesday? Is it Tuesday?
Fans from the two opposing sides coming together ahead of the big night.
Hey, Frankfurt fan, Rangers fan.
Yes,
absolutely.
yes. 50,000 supporters will be here in the city for the final, with Rangers supporters outnumbering Frankfurt fans 2-1. Businesses in the city are hoping the influx of visitors will bring a post-COVID to safe.
We will do our best, and we have a lot of experience with this. That doesn't mean there might not be problems. We sincerely believe that we have got the ability to counteract any that could crop up. but there could be
set up for those without a seat at the game itself.
The tears will flow when we lift that trophy, and they will be the happiest tears in the world, ever. They'll never see it again in my lifetime, that's for sure.
We can't expect to get a final every time, but...
BBC News, Seville.
Well, that's it from me and the team. Of course, we will be back again tomorrow. You can get in touch with me on Twitter. I'm at BBC Yalda Hakim, but Matthew will be here with Global.
Hello. Let's take a check on the weather across South and Central Asia. Heat, of course, remains the story across northern parts of India and up into Pakistan. More high temperatures to come here over the next few days. Further south, though, monsoon rains getting popping up. Highs of 40 there for Islamabad. Some spots in Pakistan once again up into the high 40s Celsius, 44 your temperature for Delhi. And then down the west coast, some heavy bursts of rain with the potential for flooding. Also looking wet for the Maldives. Signs of dropping away. And it's the same story for Delhi. 44 on Friday, back down into the 30s for Saturday and Sunday.
This grand limousine. Welcome to the grand side of Grill.
And it's interesting with Russia, when you live in a time when people cannot tell fact from fiction, when lies
they can kill us and they will also die. I can't understand for what.
When big names talk, they talk to the BBC.
Being at the heart of a live news show is having a global view really makes a difference, and shining a light on stories across the world gives our viewers another perspective. I love the pressure of being live, reflecting on the world.
I have an opportunity to create chaos.
There is always an email. We are so insignificant in this cosmos. Do you want some facts on baguettes? I'm just feeding you the stories. Maybe this is the context.
News in depth. The Context with Chris.
In Afghanistan, secret schools are being set up to educate girls who the Taliban are not allowing back into the classroom. Hardline Taliban leaders overruled a decision to allow girls to resume lessons earlier this year. In the first war crimes trial in Ukraine, a Russian soldier has pleaded to be resolved. In Spain, the government has approved a draft bill that would allow 16 and 17-year-old girls to terminate a pregnancy without parental consent. And they're all your latest headlines here on BBC World News.
In interviews with people who are shaping the news.
Welcome to Hard Talk. I'm Stephen Sacker. For the last decade, the founder of Morris, the lawyer who worked on his defense team, became his wife and is the mother of 2 of his children. Why has Julian Assange become such a polarizing figure? Patel is going to make a very big decision on whether to extradite your husband, Julian Assange, to the United States. Does this feel to you like his last chance?
Well, indeed, Priti Patel has my husband's life in her hands. We have some avenues of appeal still to go, but ultimately, over the last few years, over the last 12 years, in fact, what has happened is this is a political persecution, it's a political case.
In purely legal terms, I know that you have, or at least you in personal terms, but the legal team backing Julian Assange in professional terms have put final submissions before.
Being persecuted because he exposed the United States committing war crimes that have not been punished, and it is basically the revenge of the United States.
Just talk to me a little bit about...
Accepted that Julian faces a real risk of being driven to suicide because of oppression if he is placed in conditions of isolation. And the US, as you know, has about 80,000 people. If you look at the wording of the letter of the US government to the UK government, they said, quote,
we reserve the right to place him under the conditions, the very conditions that the High Court accepted would kill him. Amnesty International said that the decision by the High Court was a travesty of justice.
How is his health today? I don't know when you were last able to see him, but I know he did experience a serious health condition in the autumn of last year.
You can just imagine, you go to the zoo, you see what confinement does to animals. Well, it does that to people as well. Julian's been in steady decline, and his doctors have documented this over the years. In October, on the first day of the appeal hearing, he suffered.
You've had 2 children with Julian, conceived, I think, when he was in the Ecuadorian embassy.
Right.
So does that make any difference? You have residence rights in the United Kingdom. He now has 2 children who were born in the United Kingdom.
Play in this case, which are very obvious, but Julian should also not be extradited, because if he is extradited, that is a death sentence for Julian, and it is also...
Well, not forgive me, but not literally, because clearly the Americans are seeking long-term imprisonment. They're not seeking the death penalty.
They're seeking 175 years, so you tell me the difference.
Yes,
also, if
but
he's
to be
placed
clear,
in isolation...
he is not facing execution, because of course that would...
Well, I don't see any difference, actually. If they convict him, that will kill him, and the medical evidence also concludes that he will be driven to suicide. You
began to get to know him as part of his legal team going back, what, a decade and more, and...
In the embassy, because not all the staff spoke Spanish, in meetings and so on, and yeah, it was then I spent more and more time with him, more and more, got to know him more and more, not as...
Sorry to be blunt, but I mean, he was a client. You know, you were a lawyer, he was a client, it was a professional relationship. I guess it's fair to say lawyers aren't supposed to then develop personal relationships with their clients, but I guess that happened. They had surveillance cameras all over that embassy. We know that Julian, by and large, was confined to a very small space. It can't have been conducive to really getting to know each other.
Well, love finds a way, and you know, it was...
Could you find space where you knew you weren't being watched?
Well, we knew where the obvious cameras were, and when we were in front of those cameras, we avoided, you know, being seen.
It's an extraordinary detail. How do you know that?
Well, I know that from 2 things. Actually, in December 2017, one of the security guards came up to me outside the embassy. He followed me out, and he said, "The baby that you bring into the embassy," basically conveyed to me that the situation was very dangerous and sinister, and it wasn't safe for the baby.
Do you feel that all along the way you've taken the decisions that were right for you? You have any...
From the get-go, well, yes, I decided to get involved.
From the get-go, you were involved because Julian was fighting allegations of sexual assault in Sweden.
Investigation. They refused to question Julian in the UK. How is it possibly justifiable for investigators to refuse to question, to speak to the main suspect? Everyone knows in sexual assault 2009, he has received dozens of journalism awards. There's no question that he's a journalist, but he is being accused of conspiring with a source. And what does that mean? Well, he spoke to his source. And if that is a crime, then every journalist, at least those that speak to sources, are now exposed to being prosecuted and put in prison.
He encouraged the source, according to information released by the US government in conjunction with the more information, dig deeper, which we then know Chelsea Manning did.
Well, what an extraordinary claim, right? Of course, journalists all the time make requests for information. Right now, do you have of war crimes? And what happens? They want to put him in prison for the rest of his life. War crimes that have never been punished.
Journalists, by and large, when they get leaked information, they sift it, they judge it, and they publish it with a sense of responsibility. Massive amounts of raw, confidential information, all sorts of information, which according to the US government compromised sources, led to direct threats to individuals. He just dumped it on the internet.
Well, that's simply not true. And tradition, a lot of information is now in the public domain in the as part of the legal case. People who are actually working side by side with Julian say that Julian was extraordinarily responsible. In relation to the cables, WikiLeaks had a painstaking redaction process that it rolled out over the process of over the course of 9 or 10 months. It engaged over 100 media organizations in over 50 countries.
By Julian Assange.
Well, obviously judgment is used by Julian Assange. We're talking about publications, yes, at scale. He's taken every step and to protect people who were at risk of coming to physical harm. To the 2016 publications?
Yes, I am.
Well, there is in fact no clear evidence that Russia was the source. In fact, Julian has stated that Russia was not the source. And there is just no question that those publications in 2016
advocates, open democracy activists like Jeffrey de Lagassanieri in the United States have said nothing has been more damaging to WikiLeaks' reputation than the publication of leaked Democratic National Committee emails fueling the
was the more competitive candidate against Donald Trump. The polls at the time were showing that if Clinton ran against Trump, Trump would win, but if Sanders ran against Trump, Sanders would win. And as I said, you know, the New York Times,
a cache of documents which related to the Russian government, interesting information, secret information about the Russian government, and according to chat messages and a source who was involved in exchanges, Julian Assange chose not to publish this.
Referencing Russia, books about Russia as mafia state have been written based on WikiLeaks cables, and of course, you know, all sorts of claims can be made, and you can't verify them. And the
project saying it was impossible. James Ball, who worked with him at WikiLeaks briefly and said that, quote, I don't think Julian necessarily meant to build a cult, but WikiLeaks operated like one. To the Ecuadorian government, which of course offered him safe haven and then legacy media had problems with their funding models, and they were coming onto the internet and so on. And here came WikiLeaks, this huge impact of WikiLeaks, and of course it led to friction. United States. What next for you as his wife and his long-time legal supporter?
Well, I'll keep fighting until Julian is free. The UK is currently considering whether to extradite him to the
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Hello there, more weather too. Getting cooler and windier and unsettled for Cape Town. With a lot of dust lifted in the north across the Middle East as well. The heat's the story across Europe. Sustained heat could be record-breaking in places, some big thunderstorms to go with. And we've got a cyclone off the coast of Uruguay affecting the south.
Indulge in the luxurious, the most spacious, and supremely
Booyah was a hell.
Behind every headline.
I had this feeling that I'm entering a prison.
There is a human story.
Our
world.
Put your hands on the corner. I just seen the cops kill somebody, and they were treating me as if I was the suspect.
A series of documentary films that reveal the human drama at the heart of global events.
If I'm in jail, I'm
This programme asks plain questions with the help of the unrivaled range of BBC journalists right across the world. And gathered here in this building, I'll also draw my time reporting unbiased and, I promise you, with absolutely no spin. That's why we call our programme Unspun World.
On BBC World News.
This is BBC World News. I'm Matthew Emery-Waller. On today's Global, we have two special reports on the changing face of Afghanistan under the Taliban. The BBC films patrols by the department who pleads guilty to killing an unarmed civilian in Ukraine's first war crimes trial since the conflict started.
And I'm Lise Doucette in Kyiv. We'll have more on that trial as well as the latest on Mariupol, where concern grows over the
Hello and welcome to BBC News, and we start with a special report from Afghanistan.
When the Taliban first seized power last August, they initially appeared to be adopting a more flexible attitude than many had feared. We didn't see these kind of new laws governing what women should wear, how men should act, for example, being brought into place, at least not in. They're remoulding Afghanistan to fit in with the Taliban's hardline beliefs. And how often do you do this in a week?
Every day.
Every day. We're following one team in the centre of Kabul
to do that.
So if you see a woman here who's got her head covered but not her face covered, you won't say anything to her?
We can distinguish between a woman with hijab and without. If a woman is completely crossing the limits, we are the decree of God. The real cause of moral corruption is the face. If the face is not covered, then what is the point of hijab?
The inspectors are on the move. Next up. Is that always the case when cameras are not around for teams right across the country? Local residents we spoke to off camera had no complaints about these inspectors, but many worry the Taliban are growing.
Very shameless women. This is not the Afghan Republic. Now it's the Islamic Emirate. You cannot do whatever you want anymore.
The Taliban initially appeared more flexible than recent months. Do you think that was the plan all along when they took power last August, to start off slowly and then show their true colours, or has there been a change in mindset within the group?
I think Taliban are slowly and gradually they are getting, and also the traditions that they follow. They are more rural movement than urban. In rural Afghanistan, the area that they belong to, there are some strictness. There are some traditional rules that they have grown up with that. So they are bringing that to urban own group and their own movement, their leadership, their decisions. They are coming with more the perception of urban Afghans rather than being very traditional rural Taliban. They have been conflicting for the first time. You might be seeing and reporting this progressive mindset, and we will move forward.
Well, that's very significant because the Taliban up until now have been very good at keeping a lid on any kind of internal dissent. But as you say, we do seem to be hearing a bit more about some of the conversations happening within the Taliban.
Things are getting worse. If rural voice is getting higher and upper and supportive, I think it will create a lot of problem for the Taliban leadership to reverse their decisions and make an impact.
One final question, just briefly.
Very huge negative impact on Taliban movement also.
Thank you so much, Faiz Zaland, academic here in Kabul. You can see another one of our reports later on in Global about girls' education, exploring some of those issues about the differing views.
Very, very fascinating reports. Thanks so much. Now to Ukraine, a Russian soldier has pleaded guilty to killing a
Investigators gather more and more evidence of war crimes. There's great interest here and in many other places beyond in this first war crimes trial. Today, the first to go on trial, the young Russian soldier, 21 years old and looking even eastern city of Sumy, and he'd been shot in the back. We've just heard from the Prosecutor General that there will be another trial beginning in the central Poltava region of Ukraine. 2 Russian soldiers in this case, 2 more accused in one Russian missile strike. Here's his story.
With extraordinary composure and detail, Ivan shows me what he's lost.
We found my mother dead. It was a horror, very scary and hard to understand. You hope that someone was still alive, hiding in a basement.
All he's left with are memories and pictures. Polina is a long way off, if it happens at all. Ivan is given an award for courage. He helped people escape after the Russians moved in, even after losing everything.
Cemetery and see 6 graves there. Every time you go there, you cry.
Well, that latest report. And Lise, before you go, let me ask you a question about Mariupol. What is the latest you're hearing about the number of fighters?
Some of the soldiers who were critically injured getting medical treatment now in Russian hospitals. The Ukrainians had been sending assurances in their public remarks that they hoped that there would be a prisoner of war to put them on trial. Russia is calling some of them Nazis. So there's great concern among the family members of these soldiers, among many Ukrainians, about what will be their fate.
Lise Doucette, live for us there in Kyiv.
E3 Series Grand Limousine. Welcome to the grand side of Grill.
Our global food system is under profound pressure from climate change, population growth, and fractured supply chain. Job. Can farmers, scientists, and innovators overcome these challenges to protect the future of our food? Join me, James Wong, for Follow the Food on BBC World News.
Welcome back to Global here on BBC World News. Now, 3 new reports paint stark warnings about the state of our planet. A British study says extreme heat waves in South Asia have been made more each year. That's 1 in 6 deaths worldwide. India is the most affected with 2.3 million deaths, with around 1.6 million dying as a result of air pollution. Well, I'm joined now by our climate editor,
Literally 51 degrees in Pakistan on the weekend, 49.2 in New Delhi.
I know, incredible, and that impacting on millions of people, their lives, their livelihoods, every aspect of their lives. The second of those reports, I wanted to pick out...
the oxygen leaves the water, so you've got less oxygen in the water, it's more acidic and it's warmer, and that simply isn't the environment that most of the creatures and the life that lives in the ocean has evolved to cope with. It's very easy to see that would have impacts as quickly as it can.
Justin Roulette, thanks for taking us through those 3 reports. Thanks very much. Now, one more story, because the biggest ever Mars quake has been recorded on the Red Planet. The NASA InSight lander has detected the magnitude 5.
Absolutely sure of the cause. You know, here on Earth, most earthquakes are caused as a consequence of plate tectonics, this idea of the rigid outer shell, segments of it, of Earth grinding past each other. We don't have that on Mars like that. Just to put it in comparison with some of the big quakes that you know on Earth, you'll remember the big one in Japan back in 2011. In terms of the energy released, that Japanese event was 1 million times stronger than this particular. Took seismometers to the moon, so we know what the inside of the moon looks like. But that's it in terms of planetary bodies until we got InSight and its seismometer at Mars. And we now know the interior structure of Mars. We know how thick its crust is, a little bit thicker than important to life. Our magnetic field protects us. And that tells us about planets we're now discovering beyond our solar system. 5,000 to date, millions more to be discovered.
John, absolutely fascinating. Thanks very much, John Amos, our science.
Days. Further south, though, monsoon rains getting pretty close to southern India. The monsoon already has arrived in the south of Sri Lanka, across the south of the Bay of Bengal. But even before the arrival of the monsoon officially, we are seeing some heavy rain for parts of Pakistan once again up into the high 40s Celsius, 44 your temperature for Delhi. And then down the west coast, some heavy bursts of rain with the potential for flooding, also looking wet for the Maldives and Sri Lanka. And that rain actually extending across into...
वही स्वाद, नया अंदाज, अमूल चीज, ये मेरा चीज है.
Nature, all-powerful and uncompromising, a force over which mankind has no control. Harmony with nature, life can be great.
The mustard specialist since 1933. Barso se sarso.
Indulge in the luxurious, the
Spiking. Join us for a series of reports on BBC World News.
Around the world, the soaring cost of living is impacting millions of lives daily. Climate change, the COVID pandemic, and now the unfolding for our global cost of living series on BBC World News.
Hello, I'm Ross Atkins with Outside Source. This is the extraordinary story of climate change. Vaccines, Ukraine. Let's look at some of the international reactions.
Special report from Afghanistan on the secret schools that have been set up for girls. As the Taliban continues to prevent girls going to secondary school, we report on the extraordinary ways Afghans are trying to get round the ban.
They harassed me.
Thousands of football fans are gathering ahead of tonight's Europa League final between Rangers and Eintracht Frankfurt.
Pleaded guilty today to killing a 62-year-old civilian in the first war crimes trial in Ukraine since the conflict began. The incident took place in the Sumy region in the northeast of the country in the early days of this conflict. Well, with me as we'll out safely now, it has switched to their fate. What actually happens to them?
I think this is going to be really important. I think this is going to be one of the areas that we're going to be focusing on for days, perhaps weeks to come. Duma, in fact, he's, I think, the chairman of the State Duma, that's the Russian parliament, says that these are Nazis and Nazis are not war criminals simply by being Nazis.
And culminate in trials?
Well, I mean, according to the Geneva Convention, you can't put somebody on trial simply for fighting. You can put them on trial for war crimes, but you can't put them on trial for fighting. I think what's...
Separate those two elements of the story, or do you think they are actually interwoven?
Well, I mean, there's clear evidence of plenty of war crimes, and video evidence. There's photographic evidence. The war criminals that Ukraine puts on trial, the alleged war criminals, and the Azov regiment people that the Russians will want to present as neo-Nazi criminals.
A final thought, John.
It's hard to imagine it's going to come to that. What Turkey wants is for Finland and Sweden to stop giving refuge to the kind of the Kurdish guerrillas that Turkey recruited.
John, fascinating as ever. Thanks very much for joining us and taking us through those various important strands of what is happening in Ukraine. Now let us pause and catch up with Business News. Tig is here, and with so much of the business news.
From the west coast of Denmark, Adrian Murray sent us this report.
It's a rocky boat ride out to this wind farm 30 kilometres from the Danish coast. More than 90 turbines are making enough green electricity.
And send them to shore.
Standing beneath these turbines makes you feel incredibly small. They tower more than 100 metres above the sea. Denmark is a leader in this technology, and around half
wind resources. The remarkable thing is that offshore wind today is, together with, by the way, also other renewables, significantly cheaper than conventional power sources.
More wind farms like this one are set to come up in the North Sea.
We need to move away from fossils and have more green electricity. The urgency is real, first of all because of the climate crisis, obviously, but also because of the situation in Ukraine that really has shown us that this is also a question about energy security.
But
somewhere.
This port town was an oil and gas hub, but over the years it's reinvented itself as a gateway for green energy. A sign perhaps of the change this North Sea region might be about to see. Adrian.
To New York and Samira Hussein, who's our business correspondent there. Samira, thanks for being with us. An historic moment, no doubt, but do you think we'd have gotten here if it weren't for this legal action?
No, certainly not. And the women's team were really quite vocal about discrepancies were massive, and so a lot of the women on the team were very vocal about their struggle and about their fight. They also filed legal action claiming that there was pay discrimination. Well, 6 months ago we saw that American courts, and it's divided equally because FIFA, that's the World Federation of Soccer, of course, pays the men's team much more. So this is really quite significant.
Samir, we know that soccer is not huge in the US. Any sense that this could set a precedent for some of the other sports, even the big?
Mia Hamm, and then of course there's Megan Rapinoe and others. So I think it's gaining popularity, but I think you're right that it could perhaps set a precedent for other sports. Now, how other sports pay the players really sort of differ.
India, where nearly 2 million tonnes of grain is reportedly trapped at its ports after the government banned exports. Now, this means that traders could face heavy losses from being forced to sell onto a weaker domestic market. That export embargo
in the western coast of India, handling record numbers of cargo every year. On May 13th, the Indian government banned all the exports of wheat from India, fearing food security in the country, because of which the Indian government was not able to procure wheat into the domestic market. At the same time, many farmers face the reduction in wheat harvest in the country because of the recent heat wave. Many people fear.
Now, if you're a follower of cryptocurrencies, you'll probably have seen that the value of many has fallen dramatically in recent weeks, having grown massively in recent years. Well, critics of these investments have warned of the dangers posed by the fact that they're so easy.
Cito decided to get into cryptocurrency trading last year. All he needed was his phone. But if the entry was easy, the risks are also high.
The volatility of crypto is what makes it attractive. You know, like high risk, high reward kind of thing.
Crypto doesn't feel like a big leap. And along with app-based trading, entry into this virtual world has real money consequences.
But cryptocurrencies, NFTs and other digital assets are still in their infancy.
And in particular, male clients get addicted to the buzz.
You have the ability to watch Bitcoin going up, down, and basically this process, this roller coaster ride of like, woo, the highs, boom, the lows.
$500,000 in the following year when prices plunged.
I think I almost went into depression. A lot of youngsters nowadays, they just jump in. My advice to them is don't be like me, you know? Don't be greedy or big-headed.
Despite caution.
That's it for the business here on Global. Back to you now, Matthew.
Doug, thanks very much. Now do stay with us because still to come here on the programme, thousands of football fans have descended on Seville as Rangers take on Eintracht Frankfurt in the Europa League final.
Focusing only on purity and quality and leaving the rest to nature. Because when we live in harmony with nature, life can be great.
The mustard specialist since 1933. Barso se sarso.
Cool.
del.
Welcome back. Now, earlier on the programme, we got a glimpse of the changing face of Afghanistan with that report from our correspondent about the patrols from the Ministry of Vice and Virtue. Well, now to the second of our special reports, this time on the secret schools that have been set up.
Today's class, trigonometry. For their security, we're not revealing anyone's name or identity.
Are you afraid of what could happen to you? If they arrest me, they beat me, but
it hasn't happened. It makes me so sad.
Younger girls have been allowed back to school, but it's not clear when or if older girls will be. The Taliban say they need to do it. But in private, others within the group have expressed their disappointment at the decision not to allow all girls' schools to reopen. A number of religious scholars linked to the Taliban have made public declarations in support of the right of girls to learn.
It's permissible and obligatory because, for example, if a woman gets sick in an Islamic environment like Afghanistan or Pakistan and needs treatment, it's much better if she is treated by a female doctor.
But let's head there. John Watson is there for us. Lucky you, John. Just describe, first of all, the atmosphere, because I was reading 100,000 Rangers fans heading your way.
Yes, and then you add the Eintracht Frankfurt fans on top of that. It could be around here. Some of those Rangers fans, of course, desperate not to miss this opportunity to see their team in a major European final. A huge moment for the players, of course. Professional career, Matthew, as we know. Very few opportunities arise to play on the biggest stage of all, certainly here in these big finals.
Shouldn't wear brightly coloured clothes. Here's our report on our patrol alongside the inspectors of the Ministry of Vice and Virtue. Meet the inspectors of the Ministry of Vice. Maulvi Mahmood Fateh tells them. You haven't been talking about women, about what they should wear. That's what your ministry is most known for at the moment.
We have already given advice to the owner of the shopping center.
He's like Kabul, others simply cover their hair. This is how the Taliban say they should all be dressing now. What right does your ministry have to tell them how they should practice their religion, how they should dress? From their role during the Taliban's previous regime, when offenders would be regularly beaten. But here, their focus is on ensuring men don't get too close to female passengers. The Taliban are growing increasingly repressive. Layla Basim is an activist who was on board a bus stopped by Vice and Virtue inspectors.
Some women had one without hijab here. He became very angry but wouldn't even look at me. He said, "You're very shameless women. This is not the Afghan Republic. Now it's the Islamic Emirate. You cannot do whatever you want anymore."
Well, I'm pleased to say I'm joined here live in Kabul by academic Faiz Zaland, who's been a regular guest of ours on the BBC, commenting on life under the Taliban over the past 9 months. Mr. Zaland, tell me, we do certainly seem to...
ideological and Afghan traditional movement. So once they are getting back in power, they are not only sliding toward 90s, but they are also sliding toward the very pretty much definition and interpretation of the Sharia law as they have in their mindset, and also the tradition.
People with a greater exposure to the outside world as well?
That's the progress, what we are also noticing within the Taliban. The Taliban, the secular leadership or the youngster Taliban, they are conflicting for the ever first time in their own group, in their first time you might be seeing and reporting that on many of these decisions which are made regarding girls, hijab and many others, the very famous sheikhs, the very famous mullahs, the very famous religious scholars which were Taliban leadership members.
Now, a Russian soldier has pleaded guilty to killing a 62-year-old civilian in the first war crimes trial in Ukraine since the conflict began. The incident took place in the Sumy region, which is in the northeast of the country, in the early days.
The translator, he
he said that he accepted a guilty plea in the killing of a 62-year-old man who we understand was on a bicycle in the northeastern city of Sumy, and he'd been shot in the back. 100 bodies around the region of the capital, Kyiv, where we are today. Every single body, every single remain has a horrific story behind it. Our Ukraine correspondent has been to see one man, one Russian missile strike. Here's his story.
With extraordinary composure and detail, Ivan shows me what he's lost.
We found my mother dead on a fridge here.
Breathing. Then his wife. Then his father.
It was a horror, very scary and hard to understand. You hope that someone was still alive, hiding in a basement.
But the police force he works for says it is working towards holding those Russians to account, but that is a long way off, if it happens at all. Ivan is given an award for courage. He helped people escape after the Russians moved in, even after losing everything.
My relatives are upset, crying, especially when we go to a cemetery.
Before you go, let me ask you a question about Mariupol. What is the latest you're hearing about the number of fighters now out, and I suppose more importantly, what is likely to happen to them?
Well, the Russians say that now in Russian hospitals, the Ukrainians had been sending assurances in their public remarks that they hoped that there would be a prisoner of war swap. Russia has said nothing of this, and there have been calls great concern among the family members of these soldiers, among many Ukrainians, about what will be their fate.
Lise Doucette there in Kyiv for us. Now, do stay with us, because still to come on today's programme, pollution is responsible.
On February the 24th, everything changed. A man who turned to politics just 3 years before was now facing down the world's second most powerful army.
Russia's here, the BBC films patrols by Afghanistan's Department of Vice and Virtue enforcing new strict Islamic laws. And a Russian soldier pleads guilty to killing an unarmed civilian in Ukraine's first. Told me how big the quake was and what had actually caused it.
Magnitude 5. Where did it happen, first of all? Probably about 1,500 kilometers east of where InSight, the NASA probe is. InSight is just north of the equator. This idea of the rigid outer shell, segments of it, of Earth grinding past each other. We don't have that on Mars. But we do have a planet that is gradually cooling over time, and as it does, it shrinks. You loosely constructed buildings might topple over, a wall or something like that. Just to put it in comparison with some of the big quakes that on Earth, you'll remember the big one in Japan back in 2011. In terms of the
interior of Mars.
Yeah, well, we have a very good picture of what the inside of the Earth looks like. The Apollo astronauts took seismometers to the moon, so we know what the inside of the moon looks like. But that's in the middle, which we call the mantle, and then the core, the metal core, which actually in Mars is really quite big. It starts about halfway down. Why do we want this information? Well, it tells us about how rocky planets form, how they evolve through time.
A new UN report also warns of record sea levels, ocean heat and gas concentrations in 2021. Finally, a Lancet report, the third report, has found that pollution is responsible for almost 9 million premature deaths each year. That's causes have. Tell us more about that.
Yes, that's right, Matthew. We've seen changes in the sources of types of pollution over the last 5 years, with more pollution deaths coming from what we call modern pollution.
4 deaths linked to pollution in India. That is staggering, isn't it?
It really is. It's an extraordinarily large problem in India, and yet the attention to it really isn't commensurate with the size of the problem. It needs more attention.
And take us through
power stations and by industry. And that's nothing but the most obvious source of pollution to all of us. The silent types of pollution, the ones you don't see, that are also terribly toxic and that are also growing, we need to worry about these too. And they
same number of people every year around the world as cigarette smoking and second-hand smoking combined. And we know the risks of those things and have made progress on those things. But what about air pollution?
Yes, it's a very spotty response. Some cities have had good responses, and we've seen air pollution numbers drop dramatically. China has had good successes in Beijing and in Shanghai. Delhi, for example, the issue across the borders from burning of crops through that winter period is very, very difficult to solve because of the politics involved from state to state. The numbers in the US are high, but that's because the population in the US is very high. If you look at it on a rate per 100,000 population, the US is actually doing quite well. And when we look at European
was on governments, the Chinese government, the Indian government, building coal-fired power stations, for example. But how much can individual cities do just deciding things for themselves?
Well, there is a limit, of course, to the jurisdiction.
Programme from New York. Thanks so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Well, as I say, we're about to take a short break. When I'm back in a moment or two, we'll have the day's headlines, and then we're back in half an hour's time with the next edition of Today's Global with all the latest.
The monsoon already has arrived in the south of Sri Lanka, across the south of the Bay of Bengal. But even before the arrival of the monsoon officially, we are seeing some heavy rain for parts of Kerala, Karnataka, up into Goa, even southern parts of Maharashtra, seeing some heavy. Highs of 40 there for Islamabad. Some spots in Pakistan once again up into the high 40s Celsius, 44 your temperature for Delhi. And then down the west coast, some heavy bursts of rain with the potential for flooding. Also looking wet for the Maldives and
Nature, all-powerful and uncompromising, a force over which mankind has no control. But when one aligns with nature, she is warm.
Indulge in the luxurious, the most spacious, and supremely comfortable BMW 3 Series Grand Limousine. Welcome to the grand side of thrill.
City of Groningen.
The crashes are taking place just a few hundred meters away from where I'm standing now. You can hear the sound of shooting and explosions.
This is a storm that has now claimed at least 14 lives overnight. You had
breaking news.
Around the world, the soaring cost of living is impacting millions of lives daily. Climate change, the COVID pandemic, and now the unfolding conflict in Ukraine have disrupted supply chains and exacerbated the rise in prices, leaving people on toxic here. Join me, Shaima Khalil, on BBC World News.
First few days of the conflict, he now faces life in prison. The World Meteorological Organization's annual report says greenhouse gas concentration levels, sea levels, ocean heat and ocean acidification all reached unprecedented highs, prompting
the world's favourite holiday hotspots with the Travel Show team.
The Travel Show, sponsored by Turkish Airlines.
Mummies in Chile.
Wow, there's so many mummies here, Vivian.
Grannies in Austria.
This is our open kitchen where the grandpas and grandmas bake their lovely cakes.
In the Chilean region of Arica, on the northern fringes of the country's Atacama Desert, you'll find clues that something significant lies beneath the
Underground, this is crazy. I feel quite strange walking on the dead here.
Between 7000 and 1500 BC, the hunter-gatherer Chinchorro people called this area home.
Sticks are where bones are, there's masks, and what's fascinating is these smaller mummies of children and babies. Wow. It's quite small. What can you tell me about this mummy?
Y en particular, este cuerpo lo tenemos datado con radiocarbono 14 y tiene...
Your job.
No, it's very interesting. Cómo ellos trataron la muerte, cómo transformaron los cuerpos muertos en estas efigies funerarias, es realmente extraordinario.
But these fragile relics, which date by a vast new $25 million museum in construction on the grounds of the current one.
El sitio donde va a estar el nuevo museo, ¿no? Todas estas son han tomado conciencia, ¿no?, de la importancia que la cultura chinchorro tiene, ¿no? Y actualmente dentro de la misma comunidad local forma parte de uno de sus atributos de identidad.
There are said to have been so many mummies buried here that locals find them on a regular basis.
So before we came here, some people said you could see the mummies in the ground, and some said you couldn't, so I wasn't really sure what we'd find.
Tiene los vestigios de una momia chinchorro, se ven bastante en toda la ladera de este tipo de momia, pero...
What was it like growing up here? Did you see many mummies when you were a child?
Sí, había mucho más que ahora. Nosotros seguimos viviendo como los chinchorros, sin luz, sin agua y sin ser dueños hasta de los propios terrenos, donde estamos viviendo hace más de 30 años. Entonces esperamos que eso cambie, pero hasta aquí no ha cambiado.
Capaz, ¿no?, de acumulación de desechos derivados de la vida cotidiana. La gente vivió acá por miles de años y van entonces formándose estas capas.
So Vivian, how many mummies, chinchorro mummies, do you think are buried in the hill?
Wow, that was unbelievable. You know, it's one thing to see these things in a museum and totally a different experience to be there in real life. Like, I could have been standing next to one of the oldest mummified desert explorations with the world's biggest sand desert, the Sahara. Stretching out across much of northern Africa, the question is where to begin. Morocco and Egypt are both popular, and each with distinct and fascinating cultures. A spectacular way to learn about this challenging desert environment. And for those in search of a thrill, dune bashing can be done all over the world, like in the deserts of the United Arab Emirates. Or take to the sky.
The grandmother's
secret ingredient.
Yes.
So don't go away.
The Travel Show, sponsored by Turkish Airlines.
Our global food system is under profound pressure from climate change, population growth, and fractured supply chains. But might these shocks to our system actually be a catalyst for positive change?
We have to wake up and we have to feed.
Sponsored by Turkish Airlines.
As restrictions relax, I'm travelling across the UK to see how ready the country's top attractions 2-hour train ride north of London.
Hello from Manchester, home to two very famous football clubs, a vibrant music scene and trams. Now I know there's way more to the city than just that, so I've been...
So this is no ordinary taxi ride.
Hello!
And I've organised the weather for you today as well. Not that I needed to, because it's always sunny in Manchester.
So if you book with you, there is guaranteed sunshine.
The last one being the longest running British soap opera. But really, the tour can be whatever you want.
So I've asked for a route that traces the history of the city to see how it shaped the Manchester that we know today.
Which happens to be in the world's oldest English-speaking library.
Even people from Manchester don't realise that you can come in here and actually soak up the atmosphere, isn't it?
So it's definitely worth booking an appointment and coming here.
Anyway, yeah.
Before the pandemic, Manchester was the third most visited city in the UK after London and Edinburgh by international visitors. And one huge draw is its iconic music. But to find the bands of tomorrow, the Northern Quarter is where to go. It's home to some of the city's liveliest music venues. So I've come to Night and Day Cafe. Over the years, it's gained legendary status for showcasing big-named bands in their early days.
Synthesizer to Facebook followers.
Yeah, it's really good to see regular fans and regular people, and it's a really big part of our social life as well, isn't it, I suppose?
Yeah.
It's definitely picking up, it's different, isn't it, now? I think people are more confident to come out now.
I've been told if you can't make a game, it's well worth doing a stadium tour.
First, before we begin, how many of us are from Manchester? That's a big group that's not come from Manchester.
They just got all the kids to line up at the top of the tunnel and walk out through to pitch side. It was so cute. You've just walked through the tunnel?
Yeah.
How was it?
It was fun. I actually kind of felt like a footballer.
Manchester is definitely springing back from a very tough few years. But what struck me most is how proud the Mancunians are of their city, a cultural hotspot.
Into one cafe which is transforming the experience, especially staffed by the elderly in an effort to bring back a taste of the good old days.
You get a lot of good cakes, and especially in Vienna, but the best cakes.
Decorations, you come inside, you kind of feel the atmosphere. You're at grandma's living room. You have nice music, nice smell. Follow me, I show you where the cakes are baked. And this is our open kitchen.
I am 77 years old and I live in this flat since 48 years. I must say to old people, please go out. You can work in full pension, you can cook, you can speak with the guests. Is to receive the guests and I control with the vaccination. My favorite job, speak with the guests, and it's nice when the guests laugh. And I think it's my job.
People at home are always very lonely.
The pandemic, of course, hit us, and we had to close our coffee houses. And we put our heads together and thought, okay, there's no more coffee house, but what can we do with our grandmothers? So we had kind of went international. We invited grandmothers and grandfathers from all over the world to join us with their baking knowledge. Right now we're about 35 elderly people working for us. At the are live by themselves, so they're like a bit isolated. They have so much to give, and they just need a place where they can express it.
Krista's in Holland to find out why scientists are attempting to recreate Europe's ancient odours and how following your nose could enrich your travels.
Oh, it's lovely. Yeah, it smells right. It smells like just a really good air freshener.
Tuesday, this area of cloud worked its way through a weather system that's delivered some strong and gusty winds, kicking up a lot of dust and sand. But we also saw some outbreaks of rain, bringing a brief west monsoon. But the monsoon is starting to show its hand now. On the earlier satellite picture, you can see extensive cloud cover down towards the south of the region, still a long way from Pakistan. Now, this line shows where we've officially seen the arrival of the monsoon, the northward extent and Thailand. Now, in a few spots, we're likely to see in excess of 300, maybe 400 millimetres of rain. This chart shows the rainfall accumulations we're expecting over the next 5 days. But notice, northwestern parts.
There's still no sign that the Kremlin's forces are about to deliver some knockout blow.
See the headlines as they happen with breaking news alerts in the app and get the full story with bbc.com/news. Follow the story